Welcome to the Cold Case Christianity broadcast, the only Christian case-making program hosted by a cold case homicide detective. J. Warner Wallace has been investigating cold case murders in Los Angeles County for over a decade. His work has been featured on Fox News, Court TV, and Dateline. For more information about Jim's work and the case for Christianity, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. Now, here's your host, J. Warner Wallace.
Welcome back to Cold Case Christianity. I am J. Warner Wallace. We have been talking in Season 6 about young people, about the next generation of believers, really given the fact that so many of them will say they are no longer Christians or do not want to identify as a Christian. What can we do about it? Should we do anything about it? And if you're a parent, you probably have a sense that, I want to do something about it. Well, this episode we're going to be talking about how you can help train your young believers by finding the right mentor. Help train your young believers by finding the right mentor. Look, it's not easy to raise up Christians in a culture that seems to be so aligned against young believers. The community of people who are more secular is growing. And that means that the community of those of us who are believers has to become stronger. So what I want to do is help give you some principles, some basic principles to help you raise up your young believers in a way that they can have confidence in what they believe. Pass on what you believe as a Christian to the next generation. That's so important given that so many young believers are no longer claiming their Christian identity, even though they were raised in the church. The statistics are pretty disturbing, and we've chronicled those online a number of places at coldcasechristianity.com. And I'm going to be talking to you today, actually, about an article I wrote many years ago and trying to answer this question for other people who are asking me, like, well, how do you do this? I need some help. I need some help in doing this. And you'll see on our website at coldcasechristianity.com an article that says basically, parents, train your young Christians by finding the right mentor. So there's a whole section of blog articles on youth and on parenting. So if you want to hop over there, you can read those articles, and I hope they are helpful to you. Now, what I want to do today in our time together is give you a couple of ways that you can search out some help. If you are I think this is important not just for parents, but for those of you who say, well, I'm not the parent of a young believer. I don't have a high schooler or a junior high or even a college age student in my house anymore. My kids are already grown. Well, guess what? You now are the perfect candidate to become a mentor in many ways, if not for young people, for the parents of young people, right? Because that's a bigger issue. We both need help in that family. Both the high schooler who needs a mentor, if our parent is not necessarily going to be able to do some of the things I'm going to ask mentors to do, I know as a parent I can't do. And also, as a parent, I needed a mentor, somebody who had been there before me with young people, had been there before me as the parent of high schoolers, and could at least help me get through a season. Now, I will tell you that I raised all four of my kids in a Christian community. They were part of our youth group. I was the pastor. So really, in some ways, they had the worst of all worlds, right? You know that most of the time, it's PKs, pastors' kids, who can sometimes push back against these beliefs. Also, I see the same thing happening with cops' kids. Sometimes cops' kids get in trouble as well. And unfortunately, PKs and CKs are usually the ones that kids are at risk. And I have kids that are both of those things at the same time, a PK and a CK. So one of the things I learned early on is in the community in which we were living as Christians, and really, this is why church membership is so important. And not just church attendance, but being part of a Christian community is so important. Because you'll find that accessing other believers who can offer to your young people what you might struggle to offer is so incredibly valuable. And so the first principle I'm going to say to you is simply this. You're going to have to make an effort. I think it's important for us to realize that sometimes the voice that our kids hear that is influential stops being our voice. You have that influence with your kids sometimes when they're young. But as they get a little bit older, you have less and less. It's like their friends have more an impact on them. Then maybe a coach has more impact on them. Well, it turns out that's natural. And we want to help our kids find the right mentor that is not us. Because, the role of parent is different than the role of mentor. And we want to be able to understand. I understand that difference. And so I was looking for mentors for my kids. People I could put them alongside who would represent my view, but do it in a way that's more winsome and more compelling and more influential for my kids. So I've got some basic principles. I got just a text a couple of days ago from somebody who said, well, I want to find a mentor. How do I find it? Can you tell me where I should go to find a mentor? Well, it's more than likely going to be somebody in your extended community. There is no business out there, rent a mentor. I wish there was. Maybe we should start that, rent a mentor. But typically, it's somebody who you already know is in your sphere that you just haven't thought of in this way. And that person is probably going to be more influential because they already have a relationship, or at least they're familiar to your kids. So a lot of this is going to come out of your church family, out of your extended family, out of your friendships with people you know. And you got to start looking for these. Here's the first principle that I think will help you find one. Here it is. You want to find a mentor who reflects your values and beliefs to begin with. A mentor who reflects your values and beliefs to begin with. I mean, the whole point of mentoring here is got a specific target. And we're not just trying to find good people to keep our kids out of trouble. I actually want a mentor who can, number one, is a good person who will keep my kids out of trouble, who will model what it is to live a certain way. That's fine. But I also want somebody who understands the Christian worldview and sees it the way I see it. Look, within the Christian worldview, within Christianity, there's a wide spectrum of beliefs and attitudes toward the role of evidence or whatever doctrinal beliefs you might hold. Well, you and I need to find somebody who reflects our beliefs. That's not going to create an in-house battle over theology, over values. So we're looking for somebody, number one, it's not just a guy or gal in your church who you think might fit the bill. You need to know enough about what that guy or gal actually believes to know that they actually mirror your beliefs. They will advance the cause in mentorship that you are seeking to advance. This is pointed, this is directed. There's a reason why we look for mentors. And if we're not going to achieve those goals, there's no point in even getting a mentor. So the first thing you're going to have to do is the obvious thing, is you're looking for a mentor, not only who just seems to be an upright standing person, I want my son to be or my daughter to be more like him or her, but actually achieves an intellectual end, that they can teach your kids something about the views that you hold that maybe sometimes it just sounds like coming from us as parents. It's like blah, 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 blah. And we need somebody who's maybe going to be able to hold our view, but has a higher level of influence with our kids. First simple rule is you're going to find a mentor who reflects your values, reflects your beliefs. Let's take a break, and I'll give you more simple principles that'll help you both find a mentor for your kids or be the mentor your kids need or somebody else's kids need. We'll do that right after the break.
Right. Well, I think as Christians, we all believe there are two kind of powers, but not equal powers, but there are two powers we would commonly think of in Scripture for good and for evil. And one of those is, of course, God, Yahweh, and the other is Satan. So we kind of accept this view. The question, of course, is did that make sense to me as an atheist? I think what I would have agreed as an atheist, I would have given you a first step at least. I would have said, look, I don't think that evil is a thing. I think it's the absence of something. So it's kind of the shadow to the light has always been the comparison that is made. That without the light, you can't have the shadow. And the shadow is simply the absence of light in that area. So what we think of as evil is really the absence of something. But that requires the something to be there so that you can have the absence of it. So the something proves the absence, but it doesn't work the other way around, right, in life. So this is why we would say, the best analogy we have for this is that God is not creating this something we call evil. That evil is instead the absence of goodness. And a lot of that can be accounted for even in our own free choices that we make. We often choose against what God would put up for us as the source of, as a model for good. We often choose to do something we shouldn't do. Think about this for a second. If there's a loving God, And if love is one of those, the nature of the world that we have to consider, like, for example, we talked about eternity. If the world is really, if we really live eternal lives, that changes everything. Well, if God is really a God of love, you have to think about what that would entail. In order for there to be love, you have to have the freedom to choose love. Otherwise, it's coercion. There's no love in a world where there's no choices. If you have no choice but to love, you're not really loving. You're just doing the robot thing that you have no choice to do. So if we think love is a high priority, and I think the God of the Scripture is the God of love. Look, read 1 John. I mean, you're going to be stuck with this version of God, which we love, right? We think it's so great. That God is love. Okay. If that's the case, then what is the thing you have to put in place first in order to secure a universe in which love could exist? You have to secure first free agency. So it turns out if love is your goal, it's not the foundation. Free agency is the foundation upon which love stands. That's the problem, though. That's a scary world. Because if you're going to give people the freedom to love, you have to also give them the freedom to hate. The freedom to do the opposite of what you've commanded. Now, it would be a terrible world if you gave people freedom but no guidelines. Here's a gun, I'm not even going to show you. Here's a knife, I'm going to throw it at you, I'm not even going to tell you how to catch it. That would be a terrible world. That's not what God has done. He's actually given us the freedom to choose, but given us very strict guidelines so we won't abuse our freedom. Now, what we typically do is we choose to ignore his guidelines and make choices that are not the choices he would make, and then we kind of shake our fist at God. Well, a loving God gives you the freedom and guidelines, and that's exactly what we see in the Christian worldview. A loving God who gives us freedom and guidelines. And then we, of course, abuse those guidelines, and that's not really, we can't shake our fist at God when that happens. We've got to, point to the person who's really at fault, which is our own choices. So much evil we see in the world, not all, but much of the evil we see in the world, I think, is because we have a foundation which God lays in place first, of free agency, and we simply abuse it.
Okay, second principle for finding a mentor, finding somebody who can help you in your journey where you're preparing your young people, preparing people and your kids in your family, high schoolers, junior hires, whatever it may be. You want some help to do that, and mentoring is such a huge. I think sometimes we think that mentors are just the people who come in if you're missing a dad or you're missing a mom. Well, I knew that wasn't the case. I knew that my kids had both parents at home, but I still wanted them to have a mentor, somebody who could reflect my values, as we just talked about. Next step, though, is you need to find a mentor who is actually more deeply in tune with culture than you are. It's not hard, as you know, as a parent, to kind of. I'm very familiar. I was very familiar with the culture in which I grew up. But then you get 25 years of working in a career in which maybe you might have stepped out of what is popular to teenagers. What are they listening to? How they, especially in a technological age, which is kind of in many ways passed us by. I mean, the social media tools that are appearing on the stage are constantly changing. Are you on every platform? Do you know how every platform works? Do you know what's actually available to young people on different social media platforms? It's hard to stay up on top of that, right? So what I was looking for early on was somebody who was more in tune. This does not necessarily mean it's going to be somebody who's younger than you. It may just be somebody who's in that industry more, or is more as an early adopter, a first adopter. Now, a lot of people, when technology changes and it comes their way, they're the first ones to go out and buy it, the first ones to master it. They could be 60 years old, but they just love being on top of how the world communicates, what's going on in terms of culture, what's going on in terms of music, the fine arts, what videos are playing out there, what movies are available on Netflix, whatever it might be. But there's times when you and I might feel like I'm maybe a couple of years behind it right now. Got busy doing other things. Got busy, in other aspects of my life. That maybe I'm not on top, not as deeply and finely tuned as somebody I know is. Look, what I'm looking for is somebody who, number one, holds my values, but holds a degree of kind of hip or cool that I don't have with young people. Now, when I was a youth pastor, I knew this was really the case. I didn't start youth pastoring until I was in my 40s. And although I think I was in the culture enough to know what they were thinking, what they were doing, what they were listening to, back when I started, we were really at the very, very kind of initial stages of social media, the initial stages of a smartphone and the way the smartphone impacts culture. I think I'd have a hard time keeping up with it, to be honest with you, but I hired immediately 2 20-hour interns and our youth pastor that I thought could do a better job of this. Number one, they were only a couple years removed from the people I was trying to serve, the young people I was trying to serve. And they were intimately connected to all of the cultural issues, all of the technological issues that my young people had. So I would, number one, let them train me. Let my 2 interns teach me something. And number 2, let them become mentors. And I basically placed them in the role, not as organizational as much as your job is to be interactive, engage in relationships with these young people in our ministry that I know. I want you to become their mentors. This kind of mentorship required, number one, I hired people who held a Christian worldview that was grounded on the same set of theological principles that mine was grounded on, that our church was grounded on. And 2, I found people who really were cooler than I was. They were just more accessible, more deeply in tune with culture than I was. That combination works. So when you're looking for a mentor, what we're trying to do here is to help to do the thing we can't do well. Have you seen that commercial? It's a great commercial where it's 2 grandparents who are looking forward to their grandchildren arriving. And when they get to the house, the grandchildren, who are young adults, and the grandparents are a little bit older, the minute they hug them and see them on the porch, they immediately hand them their laptop and phones and technology. The grandparents hand this to the grandchildren to say, "I'm so glad you're here. Would you help us make this work?" Well, it kind of feels that way sometimes. And we're going to need some help doing with our young people what maybe we have not been paying attention to or not staying in tune with. Maybe you don't know who's on the Billboard Top 10 right now, but somebody does who could be a mentor to your kids. And that's the person we're going to engage as a mentor. That's the second principle. You're finding someone who holds your views, but someone who's maybe a little more in tune and a little cooler than you are. I did this, by the way, with one of my sons because I knew I had a guy in my ministry who was a guitar player in the worship band who looked hipper, looked like he was part of the times. He was not that much younger than me, maybe 10, 15 years, which is, I guess, a long time, but he wasn't like he was a kid. But he just connected on a way that I knew I couldn't connect. And he formed a very deep relationship with my son over the years, especially in his high school years, that I know my son reveres to this day. Find a mentor who's got a little bit cooler than you are, who holds your views, though. Then they'll hear your views come out of that more receptive relationship. And that's what I'm looking for in a mentor. Here's the third thing I'm looking for in a mentor. You got to find a mentor who is young at heart. Young at heart. That's what I mean is that you don't need somebody, like I said before, who's necessarily half your age. Don't need that. What you want is somebody who has the attributes that I talk about, youthful attributes. Passionate, engaged, right? Young people are passionate. Young people are kind of daredevils. They're engaged in the issues. Young people are, for the most part, wholly optimistic compared to older people. I learned this working cold cases. I would encounter somebody and study the case book, and I'd learn all about somebody from what this person was like in 1985 at the time of the crime. He was interviewed several times. I listened to the tapes. Boy, this is a young person who's in 1985 was interviewed, and I find that person 35 years later, and guess what? It seems like all of the optimism, joy, passion, and glee have been beaten out of this guy just by the way that life kind of does that. Young at heart are people who are teachable, who are interested in young people, who are passionate, who are humble. These are the attributes that I'm looking for in a mentor. Because mentors who are young at heart will connect. Well, I think what happens is that we have the role as parents. We might even think of ourselves as young at heart, but I bet you strangers are far more likely to see that than our own kids, because with our kids, we have to take on the role of parent, an authoritarian role at times. Authority typically is grounded in some kind of life experience. So even if you're young at heart, there's a good chance that when it comes to your kids, there are times when you have to be the authority in the room. I'm looking for a mentor who still has that texture of being young at heart, so my kids will connect to them. So I'll give you 3 things now you're looking for in a mentor. When we come back from the break, I'll give you the last 2.
Jay Warner and Susie Wallace have written 3 kids' books to help children know the truth and defend it in the public square. All 3 books mirror Jay Warner's adult books, chapter by chapter. And best yet, the kids' books are written as fictional stories that will turn your kids into detectives as they solve mysteries and learn about Christianity. There's also an interactive academy website at casemakersacademy.com where your kids can join other cadets and complete their own academy notebook. Each course has free videos, activity sheets, and more. Your young readers can even earn their own Junior Detective graduation certificates and appear on the Honor Cadet Wall. Be sure to visit casemakersacademy.com to learn more. Connect with Cold Case Christianity on social media. Visit the Cold Case Christianity homepage and click the social media icons on the top right toolbar. Jim is active on Facebook and Twitter, posting the best apologetics articles from over 250 Christian blogs around the country. You'll also find links to Jim's Instagram, Pinterest, and Google Plus accounts, along with a link to the Cold Case Christianity YouTube page. Stay connected with Cold Case Christianity and become a better Christian casemaker.
Okay. You also want to find a mentor for your young people that kind of shares your kids or your young people's interests. Your student's got an interest, he or she has things that they are interested in. And there are times when I know that I'm not good in those areas. That's not something that I have mastered. You know, when I was a youth pastor, I had young people in my ministry that were interested in board sports. I came from a part of the country here in Southern California where it seemed like pretty much everyone was doing some type of board sport. So if you had a summer camp in your church, it was probably a surf camp. If you had a winter camp, it was probably snowboarding. Weekend adventures were probably skateboarding. Maybe a spring you go wakeboarding. Board. Look, I was not raised doing board sports, even though I was raised in Southern California. I was never somebody who skateboarded or surfed or do all those things you think of for people like me who live this close to the beach. I was a runner, you know. I was involved in, at the gym all the time. It wasn't who I was. But it turned out that a lot of the young people in our church culture were so interested. I know I can't do that stuff. That's their interest. They're not my interest. So I found mentors. When I hired those 2 interns, I made sure they could do those 2 things because I knew that they would have to be interested in the things that my young people were interested to give me leverage. I could be paternal as a youth pastor with my students, but I needed these 2 mentors to be young at heart, to share my worldview, to possess a level of cool that I didn't possess, and possess a skill set I didn't possess. They could actually do those things. I had no problem with the mentor being the hero at a summer camp. As the pastor, I didn't need to be the hero. There's other ways that I earn that hero status as a pastor. If you're a parent, you don't have to be the hero in every one of these settings. There are other ways that you earn the hero status with your kids. It may not be that you're the best snowboarder or you're the best surfer or whatever it is that your kids are interested in. You get that hero status other ways. But the mentors I'm looking for are people who can do those things. So that I can actually leverage that expertise to have an even deeper relationship with my own kid. Last thing, I'm looking for mentors who actually can relate empathetically to my kid's own experience. I don't know, if you're raising kids, you kind of wonder sometimes to yourself, how is it that is my son or daughter? He or she is nothing like me. Or you'll see some similarities, of course, in your kids too. But I know that your kids are probably different than you. And I'm looking for mentors who share similar struggles, maybe have been through similar things. Maybe have shared a certain pattern of doubt that I never shared, or have shared a certain emotional struggle that I have not. It's hard for me to understand. I don't connect with that. Well, I'm looking for mentors that have some. Now, look, I realize as I'm giving you these 5 principles, you're probably thinking, how am I going to find all that in one person? Well, you have to be connected to people as well to spot these things. How much do you need to know about somebody to know if they share your kids' struggles? Well, I think that this is why it's so important for us to be in community at all times. This is why it's impossible to live the life of a Christian as a solo Christian. We have to be in community, not just in physical proximity to other Christians, but actually in relational proximity to other Christians, so we know enough about them to know these aspects of their lives. I'll tell you that I've been a part of a church that had 30,000 people, and that has some benefits. I've also been a part of a church that had 250 to 350 people. That's got different benefits. I've been a part of a church that never had more than 50. Every time we got above 50, we'd plant another cell group. I was in that church for 6 years as its pastor. One thing about small churches is that it's not hard for me to find a mentor with all 5 of these categories, all 5 of these attributes, because man, in a church of 50, you are known and you know others. Here's what I would say to you. If you're part of a church family that's really, really large, there are ways to know people intimately. That's why people do Sunday school classes that are smaller, that are just within that, people you know, or we'll do small group settings. The problem is we don't connect in those settings. We're not necessarily connected in our own church, let alone into a small group within our church, a Bible study group or whatever. And if you're not doing that, you're not going to find these kinds of people because you don't know enough about anybody in your church to know if they even fit these categories. What it's going to come down to is this is why when they do surveys of young people who have successfully grabbed the faith of their parents who have successfully passed on their faith to kids, it's typically in settings in which communities know each other. They serve together. They are in community together. Kids have seen their parents serving in that community. They've been asked to join their parents serving in that community. They are interacting with others. They tithe. They do these things that Christians do in community. This is why communities are so important. So it's one thing to say, I want to do some of this, I want to find a mentor for my kids, but if you're thinking, I just don't know who to find, it may just be that you're not involved in a community in a way that would make the mentor obvious. So I want to encourage you to be a part of a Christian community. All the churches I've tried, I don't like any of them. Really? That sounds like a you problem, not a church problem. Because no kidding, every church is filled with dirty little things called humans, of which you are one, of which I am one. Get over it. There's people in your family you don't like. You don't stop being a part of your family. You still have holidays, and you're like, not my favorite relative, not my favorite uncle, but you don't stop. You're still family. We overlook a lot of things for the sake of family. And when it comes to churches, unless they're abusive, we ought to overlook the imperfections of others and engage in church community. Anyway, that being said, those are 5 principles I hope will help you find a mentor for your young people. And I hope you'll join us here again next week at Cold Case Christianity.
Thanks for joining us at the Cold Case Christianity broadcast. If you're interested in more information about this week's topic, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. For a thorough investigation of the reliability of the New Testament Gospels and the case for Christianity, be sure to purchase Cold Case Christianity, God's Crime Scene, Forensic Faith, and Alive.